Hello and welcome to Señor Porpio. Today I want to talk about something delicate, but deeply relatable for so many of us. If you scroll through social media these days, you'll find endless stories about the tension between daughters-in-law and mothers-in-law. One says she's tired of being criticized, the other says she feels unappreciated. It's complicated, and it's real. A daughter-in-law is part of the family, yes, but the relationship often doesn't feel simple. Sometimes it's affectionate, sometimes it's distant, sometimes it hurts. Some say, we're just like mother and daughter now. Others say, I tried to get close, but it only made things harder. And many have found comfort in saying, once we kept some distance, we actually felt more at ease. So today, I want to ask this question. Is keeping a distance from your daughter-in-law a wiser choice? Perhaps you just became a grandparent, or maybe you've been struggling to understand your daughter-in-law for years. Whatever your story may be, I hope today's reflection offers you comfort, insight, or even just the feeling that you're not alone. Let's begin with the story of a 72-year-old grandmother. Talking about daughters-in-law is never easy. I've lived with mine for 30 years. I have 3 daughters, but still, my daughter-in-law is different. They say blood is thicker than water, right? And since we don't share blood, there are things that don't quite flow naturally. At first, I told myself, I'll treat her just like my own daughter. But over time, I realized she isn't a daughter and she isn't a stranger. She is something entirely unique, someone who lives in that space in between. Nowadays, we live with some distance. And honestly, that's what makes it easier for both of us. When we do see each other, it's pleasant. We greet each other with warmth, without pressure. It's hard to explain a relationship that feels both close and not close, intimate, yet reserved. In today's episode, I want to share a few stories from seniors who have walked this path, people who have tried, failed, adjusted, and sometimes found peace. There is no single answer. Every family, every culture, every dynamic is different. But maybe in listening to others, you'll hear something that helps you make sense of your own situation. Let's continue with another story from a woman in her 70s. She shares the moments where things began to shift in her relationship with her daughter-in-law. I never had a daughter, just 2 sons. So when my eldest got married, I was so excited to welcome a daughter-in-law. I truly wanted to treat her like my own. I still remember the first time she came over. It was a holiday, and I stepped into the kitchen to help with the food. I thought I was being supportive, but I could sense her surprise. She looked uneasy. Later, I found out she had her own way of doing things, and I was unintentionally disrupting her rhythm. I would eat with them, shop with them, bring over porridge when she was sick. After the baby was born, I visited even more, helping with chores, rocking the baby to sleep. But gradually, her face began to change. She smiled less, her energy faded. The warm welcome I once felt turned quiet. I started to wonder, had I done something wrong? When I asked gently, she would always say, no, it's fine, but her eyes didn't match her words. This is where Mrs. Kim found herself, struggling to understand why her good intentions were leading to distance. She wasn't trying to control anything, she just wanted to help. but somehow her kindness had become too much. One day, she overheard her daughter-in-law talking to her own mother. "She keeps coming over. I feel overwhelmed." Hearing that, she couldn't sleep for days. It felt like a punch to the chest. She thought, "I tried so hard to be a good mother-in-law, but now I'm the one making her uncomfortable." It broke her heart, and that's when the real question came up. Should I step back, or should I try even harder? She didn't know what the right answer was. Let's hear another story, this time from a woman in her late 60s. She says, "I struggled a lot with my daughter-in-law too. At first, I kept wondering, why doesn't she come around more? On holidays, she'd stop by just for a bit and rush off to her parents' house. I couldn't understand it. When I raised my sons, I gave them everything, my whole heart. But after the wedding, my son barely called, and I started to feel invisible. I felt like a storm had passed through, and I was left behind." She told us she cried more than once. She wanted to treat her daughter-in-law like a real daughter, but her affection didn't seem to reach. What hurt her most was the issue with her grandchild. When the baby was born, she was eager to visit, but her daughter-in-law said, "The baby gets overstimulated. It's better if you don't come too often." That sentence crushed her. "My friends all go to see their grandkids," she said, "so why not me?" It felt unfair. In hindsight, she realized she had been too eager. Her daughter-in-law was probably exhausted from giving birth, trying to find her rhythm as a new mother. Unannounced visits, constant offers of help. Maybe it was too much. She meant well, but didn't know how to read the signs. And so began the journey towards something she hadn't considered before, stepping back. Now, here's what we often forget. The love we give and the way it's received, those don't always match. You can do something with care and still hurt someone. A hug can feel warm to you but suffocating to another. That's why relationships like these need space. They need time, and they need a lot of quiet listening. But open conversations aren't always easy, especially in families. People worry, will this ruin what little closeness we have? So many women quietly choose distance, not as a punishment, but as protection. For themselves, for the relationship. But is that distance always the answer? For some, yes. Our next speaker said she decided to keep her distance consciously, carefully. At first, she said, it felt like grief. She used to see her daughter-in-law every week. Then it became once a month. She stopped calling first. She waited. She missed her grandson so much it hurt. Sometimes she'd call her son secretly, asking, "How's the baby? Is he healthy?" She longed to visit, to hold him, but she didn't. She stayed home. One day, she gave in. She bought some baby items and fresh fruit and showed up at the door. When her daughter-in-law opened it, her face froze. That's when she realized, yes, I have been pushing too hard. She left shortly after and made a decision. From now on, I'll only visit when invited. And even then, I'll stay only a short while, just enough to say hello and share a smile. Something changed. Her daughter-in-law began to soften. She started texting again. She even wrote her a short letter during the holidays. "How have you been, Mom? I hope we can see each other soon." And it clicked. Keeping a respectful distance sometimes helps the heart grow closer. This story is deeply human. When we are close all the time, we forget how to see each other. But when we step back, we notice the small things. We breathe, we reflect. Distance in this sense isn't rejection. It's adjustment. It's giving space not to disconnect, but to reconnect more gently. Another listener shared a very familiar story. She said, "At first, I went to my son's house almost every day. I just wanted to help. I wanted to see my grandchild be useful, be part of their daily life. But one day, my daughter pulled me aside. She said, 'Mom, if you visit too often, your daughter-in-law might feel overwhelmed. Maybe once a week is enough.' At first, she was hurt. Why should a grandmother have to limit how often she sees her grandchild? Why should love be timed?" But she listened. She decided to try just once a week. And something surprising happened. Her daughter-in-law started texting first, inviting her for weekend dinners, sending messages like, "The baby misses you, Mom." She said it wasn't just the frequency that changed, it was the quality. Our time together became warmer, more joyful, less obligation, more intention. That small adjustment made their relationship better than it had ever been. And that's the lesson, isn't it? Sometimes it's not about pulling away forever. It's about finding a new rhythm that works for both sides. A rhythm that feels respectful, not intrusive. Loving, but not heavy. Of course, not every story has a happy twist. Some are painful. One grandmother told us about the time she had a stroke. She was seriously ill, and her son wanted to bring her home, but her daughter-in-law refused. She said, "Let's place her in a care home." That decision broke her heart. She had looked after that family for years. She had raised her grandchild, cooked meals, offered support. But when she needed help, she felt abandoned. She said, "I cried so much in that first month. I couldn't believe it, but over time, I started to understand. Caring for an elderly parent isn't easy, especially for a young couple with a child. Now, once a month, my son picks me up and takes me to their house for the day. It's still awkward, but I get to see my grandchild's face, and that's enough." Stories like this remind us distance isn't always a choice. Sometimes it's forced by life, by illness, by finances, by misunderstandings. And in those moments, what matters is not how often you see each other, but how you preserve the bond between you. Let's hear from another couple, a man and woman in their 60s. The husband shared something many men might relate to. Our son only visits when his wife's family doesn't have plans, he said. They go to her parents' house almost every weekend. Even on holidays, her family comes first. One time, I dropped by unannounced and found her mother staying there for a whole week. Meanwhile, I feel like I have to ask permission just to stay a day. That stung. His wife added, "It's hard not to feel overlooked. I raised my son with everything I had. Now it feels like I'm just an outsider." The husband admitted, "I try to remind my wife, this is how younger generations live. But I can see it in her face. She feels left out. She wants to be close. She wants to be needed. But the more she tries, the more resistance she feels. And I'm stuck in the middle, trying to keep the peace. He paused and then said, "To be honest, I stopped expecting too much from our daughter-in-law, not out of anger, just out of wisdom. I don't want my wife to keep getting hurt." So many men find themselves in that same quiet role, the middle person, the bridge, the one who watches two women he loves feel misunderstood by each other. "It's a tough place to be," another listener said. "What hurt me most wasn't even my daughter-in-law. It was my son. He used to tell me everything. Now he's silent. He holds back. And when I ask why he doesn't visit, he just says, 'Mom, don't take it personally. That's just how married life is now.' But I can't help but feel replaced." Then she paused and added softly, "But when I think about it, maybe he's stuck too. Maybe he doesn't know how to make both of us feel seen." And that's when I decided not to complain, not to pressure, just to let him live his life and love him from here. One listener shared a memory that still brings her to tears. She had once made an innocent comment at dinner. "My son's stomach is sensitive. He can't really eat food like this." She didn't mean any harm, just a worried mother's habit. But she noticed her daughter-in-law's face harden. The table grew quiet. Days later, her son called and said, "Mom, she was really hurt. She worked so hard to prepare that meal." That night, she sat alone in her room. She kept picturing her daughter-in-law's face, smiling at the wedding, crying after giving birth, and suddenly it hit her. "I hurt that girl. She didn't mean to, but she did." And that kind of hurt doesn't always heal easily. Another woman recalled a painful birthday surprise. She had shown up unannounced at her daughter-in-law's home, carrying a cake and a gift. But the moment the door opened, she saw confusion, not joy. "Oh, I have plans with friends tonight," her daughter-in-law said. She stood there awkwardly, holding a bag of fruit, alone. Later, she sat on a bench outside their building, tears quietly falling. "I wasn't trying to intrude," she thought. "I just wanted to be kind." When love is offered and not received, it hurts. When you give your heart and are told it's too much, you feel rejected. But these women didn't stop loving. They simply learned to love from a little further away. One listener said, "The next birthday, I didn't visit. I sent a short message instead. 'Happy birthday. Hope we can have a meal sometime soon.' And her reply came quickly, 'Thank you, Mom. Sorry about last time. I'd love to see you.'" Later that week, they met at a quiet cafe. It was a little awkward, but it was warm. That one cup of tea opened a small door, and slowly their connection began to return. She said, "I realized then, distance doesn't mean disconnection. Sometimes it's just giving the relationship a chance to breathe." So, is distance from your daughter-in-law the wise choice? Sometimes, yes, but not a cold distance, not a punishing, silent, a gentle, respectful, warm space where both sides can feel safe, a space filled with respect, with waiting, with a quiet kind of love. Being close doesn't always mean being warm. Being far doesn't always mean you've failed. In the right distance, you can still build a family that looks different but feels just as meaningful. One family counselor told us, the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law dynamic isn't just personal. It involves generational shifts, power structures, and emotional labor. Even with the best intentions, a mother-in-law may be perceived as controlling. And when a daughter-in-law keeps distance, the mother-in-law may feel ignored or rejected. The key is not closeness, but calibration. The first step in that process is distance. A professor of late life psychology shared this. As we age, emotional sensitivity increases. We feel neglected more easily. Conflicts with family hit harder. That's why it's important to lower expectations, not as a form of giving up, but as a path to peace. Don't expect your daughter-in-law to meet your ideal. Let her come as she is. And most importantly, take care of your own emotional health first. These aren't just lessons for mothers-in-law. They're reminders for all of us to be kind to ourselves, to stop blaming ourselves, and to remember that aging doesn't mean fading. It means adjusting and sometimes healing. One woman told us, I don't talk to my daughter-in-law often now, but I send small gifts, seasonal fruits, snacks the grandchild likes, just little reminders that I'm thinking of them. And in return, she sends me photos, sometimes even homemade food. We're not close like I once imagined, but we're good, and that's enough. So, is keeping distance the wise thing to do? Maybe. If it includes patience and care and a quiet kind of hope. Sometimes your daughter-in-law calls and says, Mom, would you like to visit this weekend? And on those days, your heart feels so full, not because she came close, but because she chose to. That kind of distance is not a wall, it's a gift. Thank you for listening to today's story. If you're navigating your own journey with your daughter-in-law, I hope you felt heard. You're not alone. She may not be your daughter, but she is your family, a different kind of family, still precious, still worth understanding, and sometimes just one step back can become the very beginning of coming closer. Until next time, this has been Senior Radio.